In the 15th century, a new country emerged on the world map, the United States of America. This marked the first time in history that a former colony achieved independence. Let us explore the story of how this nation came to be. In 1492, explorer Christopher Columbus discovered a new continent, America. Over the following 200 years, numerous European nations established colonies there. These powers engaged in fierce competition for new territories and resources, leading to frequent conflicts among colonizers and with indigenous populations. In 1763, France lost to Britain in the 7 Years' War, surrendering its North American territories. British colonies proved profitable through the triangular trade system. Europeans captured or purchased African slaves, sold them in America, where they produced goods that were then traded in Europe. While colonies nominally answered to the British Crown, they maintained significant autonomy and their own governing bodies. By the late 18th century, tensions escalated between colonial residents and European authorities. The British Parliament imposed new taxes on colonists, sparking protests. Since colonists lacked parliamentary representation, they refused taxation. On December 16, 1773, Boston Harbor witnessed perhaps the most famous protest against British government actions, the Boston Tea Party. Protesters disguised as Native Americans dumped tea from merchant ships into the sea. The Tea Act of 1773 had effectively granted one company a monopoly on tea sales in American colonies, outraging local inhabitants. Britain's response included 5 laws strengthening colonial control, laws the colonists deemed intolerable. In 1774, the First Continental Congress convened. A petition demanding repeal of these intolerable laws was sent to King George II, but Britain only intensified its colonial policies, fueling separatist sentiment. The 13 colonies united their forces, creating the Continental Army, to resist Britain. On July 4, 1776, the Second Continental Congress published the Declaration of Independence of the United States of America. The rebellion of 13 colonies became a war for independence, also known as the American Revolution. George Washington commanded the Continental Army. In 1778, France joined the war supporting the United States to weaken Britain. Later, the Spanish Empire and Holland became allies. Fighting such opponents drained British resources, forcing King George II to abandon claims on the colonies. On November 3, 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed, with Britain recognizing colonial independence and officially ending the war. Britain also ceded territories extending to the Mississippi River to the new nation. On September 17, 1787, the Constitution of the United States of America was adopted. According to this document, power was strictly divided into 3 branches: legislative power represented by Congress, judicial power by the Supreme Court, and executive power, the government, headed by the President. The United States became a federal republic. In 1789, General George Washington was elected the first president of the United States. After his death, numerous geographical features were named after him, including the nation's capital, Washington. The young nation still had a long journey ahead before becoming what we know today. The nation divided. American history includes numerous wars, but the Civil War remains the bloodiest in the nation's history. Let us examine why this war began. By the mid-19th century, substantial problems and contradictions had accumulated, eventually splitting the USA into 2 opposing parts, North and South. Northern states had moderate climates unsuitable for agriculture. Their economy centered on industry, with populations of free immigrants. The South differed entirely. Favorable climate supported agriculture as the economic foundation. Wealthy plantation owners, descendants of European aristocrats, imported slaves from abroad. These circumstances intensified economic, political, and social contradictions. Southerners realized direct European trade without northern intermediaries would be profitable. The central northern government imposed taxes and tariffs on European trade to protect its economy, angering Southerners. The slavery question was crucial to the coming conflict. Africans were brought to the United States, enslaved to work fields, serve as household staff, or be exploited otherwise. Southern slaveholders opposed abolitionism, the movement for black liberation. Northern states, seeking free labor, opposed slavery as inefficient for industrial development. Economic problems generated political ones. In the South, enslaved black people constituted a significant population without voting rights. Nevertheless, Southerners opposed the Northern central government imposing conditions, despite the North having more free citizens with voting rights. Formally, each state had constitutional rights to conduct its own internal policies. On March 4, 1861, Abraham Lincoln became president. Representing the Republican Party, he opposed slavery and active Southern trade with Europe. Fearing central government control, 6 slaveholding states seceded, though the Constitution neither permitted nor prohibited secession. On February 4, 1861, before Lincoln's inauguration, the Confederate States of America were proclaimed on separated territories. That year, a constitution was adopted, and Jefferson Davis elected first president of the CSA, taking office before Lincoln. The conflict escalated to armed confrontation. Fighting began April 12, 1861. Following Confederate forces' capture of Fort Sumter, President Lincoln declared Southern states rebellious, calling for 75,000 volunteers. Eventually, mandatory conscription was introduced. Many wavering states then declared secession. The Confederacy also first recruited volunteers, then instituted mandatory service. Thus, the war began. The Cold War era. The Soviet Union made decisive contributions to victory in World War II, earning high international status through Security Council membership and veto power. However, Western bourgeois governments had feared Soviet influence since the Bolshevik rise to power, leading to formation of 2 opposing camps. In early April 1945, Winston Churchill ordered his staff chiefs to develop Operation Unthinkable, a surprise attack plan against the USSR. Western countries realized crushing the USSR by force was impossible. Hitler's example proved sufficiently convincing. The USSR-USA confrontation proceeded without open armed conflicts, hence called the Cold War. This bipolar world saw capitalist and socialist system supporters struggle for global influence, feeling the need to unite against opposing threats and desiring advantages for potential Third World War. Churchill's 1946 Fulton speech formally initiated hostilities, proposing capitalist countries unite against socialism's spread, sharpening international relations. On March 12, 1947, the Truman Doctrine was announced, formulating containment policy toward the USSR worldwide. Hundreds of millions of dollars were allocated to Greece and Turkey under pretext of communist threat. From the late 40s through 1957, McCarthyism swept America, a movement accompanied by intensified anti-communist sentiment and political repression against communists and anti-American citizens. Justifying policies through Red Scare rhetoric, McCarthyists also fought liberal intellectuals, unions, and negotiation policies with socialist countries. Simultaneously, the USSR conducted campaigns against dissidents and cosmopolitanism, a mass political campaign from 1948 to 1953, targeting skeptical and pro-Western tendencies among Soviet intellectuals, viewed as unpatriotic. Within the Cold War framework, socialist and capitalist blocs formed. In 1949, Comecon, Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, and NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, were created, uniting capitalist bloc military resources. In 1955, the Warsaw Pact was established, cementing global bipolarity as a military political alliance led by the USSR. Communists and capitalists competed for influence across various nations. Though direct US-USSR armed confrontations didn't occur, hybrid wars and local conflicts did. Between 1948 and 49, the USSR blockaded rail and road routes to West Berlin sectors, the First Berlin Crisis and early Cold War crisis. Consequently, in 1949, Germany divided into West, FRG, and East, GDR. On October 1, 1949, the People's Republic of China was proclaimed following victory over the Kuomintang and Communist Party seizure of power, with Soviet assistance. Later, in 1960, USSR-China relations severed over ideological disagreements. The 50s also saw the Korean War for Peninsula reunification. The USSR supported the Communist North under leadership, while the USA supported the capitalist South. The bloody war failed to achieve unification. In 1961, new tensions arose over West Berlin's status, concerns about Western intelligence activity, and brain drain westward. The famous Berlin Wall was erected. In October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis erupted, considered the Cold War's peak. After American medium-range missiles were placed in Turkey within reach of Moscow, the USSR positioned missiles in Cuba. The crisis resolved with Soviet dismantlement of Cuban missiles, while the USA lifted Cuba's blockade and removed Turkish missiles. The Vietnam conflict. In the mid-1960s, the United States sent troops to Vietnam's distant jungles. The prolonged war's consequences and mass protests profoundly impacted American society. Vietnam is a small Southeast Asian state on the Indochina Peninsula. The country was a French colony, then captured by Japan during World War II, gaining freedom from foreign rule in 1945. However, the First Indochina War began. By then, the Cold War was underway, with US and Soviet intervention. Ultimately, Vietnam divided into the north, supported by the USSR and China, and the south, supported by the USA and allies. In 1960, a pro-communist guerrilla movement emerged in the south, the Viet Cong. To supply rebels, North Vietnam invaded neighboring Laos, establishing the famous Ho Chi Minh Trail, named after the northern leader. Meanwhile, the U.S. government contemplated sending troops to aid South Vietnam. Authorities and media warned that if communists captured Vietnam, a domino effect would turn all Indochina and Asia red. In 1964, President Lyndon Johnson received authorization to use armed forces in Indochina following several naval confrontations between American ships and North Vietnamese torpedo boats in the Tonkin Gulf. What exactly occurred remains unclear, yet the states began troop preparations. From March 2, 1965, Operation Rolling Thunder commenced. Massive bombardment of North Vietnam by U.S. air forces. This lengthy, extremely brutal campaign intentionally destroyed civilian targets as well. The American military employed napalm, a special incendiary mixture. From March 8th, American soldiers deployed to Vietnam. By year's end, over 100,000 served there, reaching 500,000 at the war's peak. Both volunteers and draftees were sent. Yes, the U.S. had conscription then. The government hoped for quick, easy victory, but reality proved different. Impenetrable Vietnamese jungles and guerrilla activity prevented confident American advancement. The war dragged on. Gradually, societal disillusionment and dissatisfaction grew. Eventually, information about U.S. military crimes leaked into American media, with brutal war footage spreading worldwide. By the late 60s and early 70s, the anti-war movement gained momentum. Students facing draft, prominent figures, racial minorities, and even returned veterans protested. Police dispersed actions, branding protesters, traitors, and communist sympathizers. Authorities' abuses and brutal crackdowns shocked people, only intensifying discontent. In 1967, approximately 100,000 people marched from central Washington to the Pentagon, demanding draft cancellation and war termination, a significant but far from the largest protest. Meanwhile, American military morale deteriorated. Many soldiers no longer understood their purpose or how long the war would continue. Desertion cases increased. Soldiers refused combat assignments. In early 1968, North Vietnamese forces launched large-scale offensives across all fronts. The U.S. Army repelled attacks. Tactically, communists lost. However, this unexpected offensive against claims of imminent U.S. victory shocked the military and society. On October 15, 1969, approximately 15 million Americans simultaneously participated in anti-war actions and mass strikes. By the 70s, absolute majority of citizens desired war termination and soldiers' return home, though many wanted to see the war through. Next, President Richard Nixon promised citizens peace with honor. Society continued demanding complete troop withdrawal, while Nixon refused to lose majority support. These factors, plus battlefield failures and economic deterioration, eventually led to withdrawal decisions. In 1973, under peace agreement terms, the U.S. military left Vietnam without defeating the communists, and Northern forces soon captured the South. Many consider the Vietnam War a shameful page in U.S. history. Over 2.5 million Americans participated in combat. The country lost over 58,000 soldiers killed. Total human losses numbered in the millions. Many veterans returned with post-traumatic stress disorder. Vietnam became a national trauma for American society, reflected in popular culture. Cold War continues. In 1964, the Vietnam War began. Vietnam divided between North and South. The North received support from the USSR, PRC, and Warsaw Pact countries. Correspondingly, The South received USA and NATO support. The war ended with U.S. troop withdrawal and Northern victory, unifying the country under Communist Party rule. The Cold War wasn't always aggressive. Sometimes aggression yielded to détente. For example, 1975 is remembered for the joint space mission Soyuz Apollo. That year also saw the Helsinki Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe. New tensions ignited in 1979 when the USSR deployed troops to Afghanistan to assist a friendly country against Mujahideen and protect state borders. This situation didn't suit the USA at all. Therefore, the SALT II Treaty wasn't ratified that year. In 1980, the USA boycotted the Moscow Olympics, and in 1983, Ronald Reagan called the USSR an evil empire. In 1985, Gorbachev came to power in the USSR, announcing new political thinking. He believed universal human values superseded Class I's, a policy with controversial assessments. In 1985, the Geneva meeting between Gorbachev and Reagan occurred, charting a cooperation course. In 1987, a USSR-USA treaty was signed, eliminating intermediate and shorter-range missiles. Between 1988 and 89, Soviet troops withdrew from Afghanistan and from Warsaw Pact countries. That same year, the USSR normalized relations with China. The Berlin Wall fell. In 1990, Gorbachev agreed to German reunification. On November 21, 1990, the Paris Charter was signed by 32 countries ending confrontation, effectively proclaiming the end of half-century opposition between two systems and beginning a new era of democracy, peace, and unity. In 1991, Comecon and the Warsaw Pact were dissolved. The joint Russia-USA declaration signed February 1, 1992 at Camp David officially ended the Cold War.